By now, we have learned a lot about Belle Gunness and her victims in this series. Now, let's take a look into how Belle lured all these men to her farm. Some of them seeking love and some of them looking for a business opportunity. In the end, however, once they got there, they never left. Welcome to Episode 9, Triflers Need Not Apply. In February of 1904, 30-year-old Olaf Lindboe fell victim to one of Belle's ads in a Scandinavian newspaper. But she didn't stop there and put out dozens of ads over the course of a few years. A popular ad swirling around the Midwest newspapers read as this: "Comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of a gentleman equally well provided with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply." In April 1905, just months after Olaf Lindboe's disappearance, Belle's neighbor was at her farm when a new gentleman arrived from out of town. He introduced himself as Henry Gerholt. He told Belle's neighbor, Chris Christopherson, he had come there to work on the farm for Mrs. Gunness. He had a heavy trunk, and Christopherson helped him carry it to the room where Olaf Lindboe had stayed. Mr. Gerholt was very pleased with everything at the farm and his accommodations. He wrote to his mother a week later telling her it was the nicest place in the neighborhood. He explained that it was a handsome 13-room brick house surrounded by a grove of green trees. He also said how he was being treated just the same as one of the family. However, one day in August 1905, during harvest time, Belle went to the Christopherson place to see if he could help her stack oats. She said Gerholt suddenly quit. Christopherson asked Belle why he would leave her at a time when the oats had just been cut. Belle said, he said he was sick and couldn't do the work. He had gone to Chicago, taking only a satchel with some clothes. His trunk and the bulk of his garments, including a heavy fur coat, he had left behind. That winter, as he later testified, Christopherson saw Mrs. Gunness wearing the fur coat which Gerholt had left. Christopherson was puzzled as to why a man going to Chicago would leave his coat. Christopherson asked Belle if Gerholt had written to her for the coat. Belle replied no. She had not heard a word from him. Belle had another ad out shortly after that, and the first to respond was a middle-aged Norwegian immigrant named George Barry. He left his home in Illinois with $1,500 in cash, which would be $50,000 today. He informed his friends that he was moving to LaPorte for a job and possibly marriage. A few weeks later, Christian Hilkman of Dover, Wisconsin, sold his farm for $2,000 and said goodbye to friends and family after arranging to have the paper forwarded to his new address in LaPorte. Informing his boss that he was going to marry a rich widow, Emil Tell, a Swedish bachelor from Kansas, quit his job at the Howard Massey Furniture Company and traveled to LaPorte with $2,000 in his pocket. 50-year-old Ola Budsberg of Wisconsin sold his farm to his grown sons and told them he was going to LaPorte to get married. He had $1,000 in cash. In December 1905, John Moe, a 40-year-old bachelor from Minnesota, took $1,000 out of his bank and told the teller that he was going to LaPorte, Indiana, where he would be using the money. And there were more, many more. According to the testimony of Belle's 19-year-old farmhand Emil Greening, he told how Mrs. Gunness received men visitors all the time. A different man came nearly every week to stay at the house. She introduced them as cousins from Kansas, South Dakota, Wisconsin, and Chicago. Most of the men brought trunks with them. Mrs. Gunness kept the cousins with her all the time in the parlor and her bedroom. She was always careful to make the children stay away from her cousins. None of these men stayed around very long, though neither Greening nor anyone else ever witnessed their departure. Strangely, every one of them left his trunk behind. Eventually, Greening recalled, "There were about 15 trunks, and one room was packed full of all kinds of men's clothing." Mrs. Gunness said that the cousins had left their clothes, and she wasn't certain that they'd be back for them. In the summer of 1906, during one of the intervals between visits from her many male cousins, Belle hired a local man, a Polish immigrant named William Brogiski, to dig a couple of holes in the muck of her fenced-off hog pen. She was very exact about their dimensions, 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, and 4 feet deep. "They are to be used for rubbish pits," Belle explained. The following week, Brogiski had an occasion to return to the farm. The holes, he noticed, still lay empty. As he later testified, he, quote, "never saw what went into the bottom of those pits, nor when they were filled." Several years would pass before Brogiski, along with the rest of the horror-struck world, discovered their true purpose. 49-year-old Andrew Helgeline seemed to be Belle's toughest victim. She had many letters of correspondence with him starting in the summer of 1906. Over the course of 18 months, she would have sent between 75 to 80 letters to him. The letters were all written in Norwegian. A translator who later provided English versions for the court described them as, quote, "extremely faulty and evidently the work of an ignorant person." Join me next time in episode 10 to learn about how Belle enticed Andrew Helgeline to come to her farm and how she sketched enticing portraits of the blissful domestic life they would share. Thank you, like, and subscribe for more.